Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. And this is Knights Templar from the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Albert G. Mackey. Knights Templar. The piety or the superstition of the age had induced multitudes of pilgrims in the 11th and 12th centuries to visit Jerusalem for the purpose of offering their devotions at the sepulchre of the Lord and the other holy place in that city. Many of these religious wanderers were weak or aged, almost all of them unarmed, and thousands of them were subjected to insult, to pillage, and often to death, inflicted by the hordes of Arabs who, even after the capture of Jerusalem by the Christians, continued to infest the seacoast of Palestine and the roads to the capital. To protect the pious pilgrims thus exposed to plunder and bodily outrage, 9 French knights, the followers of Baldwin, united in the year 1118 in a military confraternity or brotherhood in arms and entered into a solemn compact to aid each other in clearing the roads and in defending the pilgrims in their passage to the holy city. 2 of these knights were Hugh de Payens and Godfrey de Saint-Aldemar. Renoir, Les Templiers, says that the names of the other 7 have not been preserved in history, but Wilke, Geschichte des Teichordans, gives them as Roral, Gundamar, Godfrey Bissol, Payan de Montdidier, Archibald de Saint-Amand, André de Montbard, and the Count of Provence. Uniting the monastic with the military character, they took in the presence of the Patriarch of Jerusalem the usual vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and with great humility assumed the title of Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ. Baldwin, the King of Jerusalem, assigned for their residence a part of his palace which stood near the former site of the temple, and the abbot and canons of the temple gave them as a place in which to store their arms and magazines, the street between the palace and the temple, whence they derived the name of Templars, a title which they ever afterward retained. Raynaud says that Baldwin sent Hugh de Payens to Europe to solicit a new crusade, and that while there he presented his companions to Pope Honorius II, from whom he craved permission to form religious military order in imitation of that of the Hospitallers. The pontiff referred them to the ecclesiastical council, which was then in session at Troyes in Champagne. Thither de Payens repaired and represented to the fathers the vocation of himself and his companions as defenders of the pilgrim. The enterprise was approved, and Saint Bernard was directed to prescribe a rule for the infant order. This rule, in which the knights of the order are called pauper, Comilitis Christi et Tempel Salomonis, or the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, is still extant. It consists of 72 chapters, the details of which are remarkable for their ascetic character. It enjoins severe devotional exercises, self-mortification, fasting, and prayer. It prescribed for the professed knights white garments as a symbol of a pure life. Esquires and retainers were to be clothed in black. To the white dress, Pope Eugenius II subsequently added a red cross to be worn on the left breast as a symbol of martyrdom. Hugh de Payens thus provided with a rule that gave permanence to his order, and encouraged by the approval of the Church, returned to Jerusalem, carrying with him many recruits from among the noblest families of Europe. The Templars soon became preeminently distinguished as warriors of the cross. St. Bernard, who visited them in their temple retreat, speaks in the warmest terms of their self-denial, their frugality, their modesty, their piety, and their bravery. Their arms, he says, are their only finery, and they use them with courage, without dreading either the number or the strength of the barbarians. All their confidence is in the Lord of hosts, and in fighting for his cause they seek a sure victory or a Christian and honorable death. Their banner was the Beauséant of divided white and black, indicative of peace to their friends but destruction to their foes. At their reception, each Templar swore never to turn his back on 3 enemies, but should he be alone, to fight them if they were infidels. It was their wont to say that a Templar ought either to vanquish or die, since he had nothing to give for his ransom but his girdle and his knife. The order of the Temple, at first exceedingly simple in its organization, became in a short time very complicated. In the 12th century it was divided into 3 classes, which were knights, chaplains, and serving brethren. 1. The knights. It was required that whoever presented himself for admission into the order must prove that he was sprung from a knightly family and was born in lawful wedlock, that he was free from all previous obligations, that he was neither married nor betrothed, that he had not made any vows of reception in another order, that he was not involved in debt, and finally, that he was of a sound and healthy constitution of body. 2, the chaplains. The order of the Temple, unlike that of the Hospitallers, consisted at first only of laymen. But the bull of Pope Alexander III, issued in 1162, gave the Templars permission to receive into their houses spiritual persons who were not bound by previous vows, the technical name of whom was chaplains. They were required to serve a novitiate of a year. The reception was, except in a few points not applicable to the clergy, the same as that of the knights, and they were required to take only the 3 vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Their duties were to perform all religious offices and to officiate at all the ceremonies of the order, such as the admission of members at installations, etc. Their privileges were, however, unimportant and consisted principally in sitting next to the master and being first served at table. 3, the serving brethren. The only qualification required of the serving brethren was that they should be free-born and not slaves, yet it is not to be supposed that all the persons of this class were of mean condition. Many men, not of noble birth, but of wealth and high position, were found among the serving brethren. They fought in the field under the knights, and performed at home the menial offices of the household. At first there was but one class of them, but afterward they were divided into 2, the brethren at arms and the handicraft brethren. The former were the soldiers of the order. The latter, who were the most esteemed, remained in the preceptories and exercised their various trades, such as those of farriers, armorers, etc. The reception of the serving brethren did not differ, except in some necessary particulars, from that of the knights. They were, however, by the accident of their birth, precluded from promotion out of their class. Besides these 3 classes, there was a 4th knot, however, living in the bosom of the order, who were called affiliati, or the affiliated. These were persons of various ranks and of both sexes, who were recognized by the order, though not openly connected with it, as entitled to its protection and admitted to a participation in some of its privileges, such as protection from the interdicts of the Church, which did not apply to the members of the order. There was also a class called donates or donats. These were either youths whom their parents destined for the service of the order when they had attained the proper age, or adults who had bound themselves to aid and assist the order so long as they lived, solely from their admiration of it and a desire to share its honors. Over these presided the Grand Master, more usually styled in the early days of the order, simply the Master of the Temple. In the Treaty of Peace executed in 1178, between the Templars and the Hospitallers, Odo de Saint-Armand calls himself humble master of the order of the Temple. But in after times this spirit of humility was lost sight of, and the title of Grand Master was generally accorded to him. His allowances were suitable to the distinguished rank he held, for in the best days of the order, the Grand Master was considered as the equal of a sovereign. The Grand Master resided originally at Jerusalem, afterward, when that city was lost, at Acre, and finally at Cyprus. His duty always required him to be in the Holy Land. He consequently never resided in Europe. He was elected for life from among the knights in the following manner. On the death of the Grand Master, a Grand Prior was chosen to administer the affairs of the order until a successor could be elected. When the day which had been appointed for the election arrived, the chapter usually assembled at the chief seat of the order. 3 or more of the most esteemed knights were then proposed. The Grand Prior collected the votes, and he who had received the greatest number was nominated to be the electing prior. An assistant was then associated with him in the person of another knight. These 2 remained all night in the chapel, engaged in prayer. In the morning they chose 2 others, and these 4 2 more, and so on until the number of 12, that of the apostles, had been selected. The 12 then selected a chaplain. The 13 then proceeded to vote for a Grand Master, who was elected by a majority of the votes. When the election was completed, it was announced to the assembled brethren, and when all had promised obedience, the prior, if the person was present, said to him, "In the name of God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, we have chosen and do choose thee, Brother N, to be our master." Then, turning to the brethren, he said, "Beloved sirs and brethren, give thanks unto God. Behold here our Master." The chaplains then chanted the Te Deum, and the brethren, taking their new master in their arms, carried him into the chapel and placed him before the altar, where he continued kneeling while the brethren prayed. And the chaplains repeated the Kyrie eleison, the Pater Noster, and other devotional exercises. Next in rank to the Grand Master was the Seneschal, who was his representative and lieutenant. Then came the Marshal, who was the general of the order. Next was the Treasurer, an office that was always united with that of Grand Preceptor of Jerusalem. He was the Admiral of the order. The Draper, the next officer in rank, had charge of the clothing of the order. He was a kind of commissary general. The Turcopolier was the commander of the light horse. There was also a class of officers called visitors, whose duties, as their name imports, was to visit the different provinces and correct abuses. There were also some subordinate offices appropriated to the serving brethren, such as sub-marshal, standard-bearer, farrier, etc. These officers, with the grand preceptors of the provinces and the most distinguished knights who could attend, constituted the general chapter or great legislative assembly of the order, where all laws and regulations were made and great officers elected. This assembly was not often convened, and in the intervals its powers were exercised by the chapter of Jerusalem. The order thus organized, as it increased in prosperity and augmented its possessions in the East and in Europe, was divided into provinces, each of which was governed by a grand preceptor or grand prior. For the titles were indiscriminately used. That, however, of preceptor was peculiar to the Templars, while that of prior was common both to them and to the Knights Hospitallers of St. John. These provinces were 15 in number and were as follows: Jerusalem, Tripolis, Antioch, Cyprus, Portugal, Castile, and Lyon, Aragon, France and Auvergne, Normandy, Aquitaine, Provence, England, including Scotland and Ireland, Germany, Upper and Central Italy, and Apulia and Sicily. Hence it will be seen that there was no part of Europe, except the impoverished kingdoms of Denmark, Sweden and Norway, where the Templars had not extended their possessions and their influence. In all the provinces there were numerous temple houses called preceptories, presided over by a preceptor. In each of the larger preceptories there was a chapter, in which local regulations were made and members were received into the order. The reception of a knight into the order was a very solemn ceremonial. It was secret, none but members of the order being permitted to be present. In this it differed from that of the Knights of Malta, whose form of reception was open and public. And it is to this difference between a public reception and a secret initiation that may perhaps be attributed a portion of the spirit of persecution exhibited by the Church to the order in its latter days. Of this reception, the best and most authentic account is given by Munter in his Statutenbuch des Ordens der Tempelherren, pages 29 through 42. And on that I shall principally rely. On the day of the reception, the master and the knights being in the chapter, the master said, "Beloved knights and brethren, ye see that the majority are willing that this man shall be received as a brother. If there be among you anyone who knows anything concerning him, wherefore he cannot rightfully become a brother, let him say so. For it is better that this should be made known beforehand than after he has been brought before us." All being silent, the candidate is conducted into an adjoining chamber. 2 or 3 of the oldest knights are sent to him to warn him of the difficulties and hardships that he will have to encounter, or as the Benedictine rule says, all the hard and rough ways that lead to omnia dura et aspera, percus itur ad diem. They commenced by saying, "Brother, do you seek the fellowship of the order?" If he replied affirmatively, they warned him of the rigorous services which would be demanded of him. Should he reply that he was willing to endure all for the sake of God and to become the slave of the order, they further asked him if he were married or betrothed, if he had ever entered any other order, if he owed more than he could pay, if he was of sound body, and if he was of free condition. If his replies were satisfactory, his examiners returned to the chapter room and made report, whereupon the master again inquired if anyone present knew anything against the candidate. All being silent, he asked, "Are you willing that he should be received in God's name?" And all the knights answered, "Let him be received in God's name." His examiners then returned to him and asked him if he still persisted in his intention. If he replied that he did, they gave him the necessary instructions how he should act and led him to the door of the chapter room. There entering, he cast himself on his knees before the master with folded hands and said, "Sir, I am come before God, before you and the brethren, and pray and beseech you, for God and our dear Lady's sake, to admit me into your fellowship and to the good deeds of the order, as one who will for all his life long be the servant and slave of the order." The master replied, "Beloved brother, you are desirous of a great matter, for you see nothing but the outward shell of our order. It is only the outward shell when you see that we have fine horses and rich caparisons, that we eat and drink well and are splendidly clothed. From this you conclude that you will be well off with us. But you know not the rigorous maxims which are in our interior, for it is a hard matter for you, who are your own master, to become the servant of another. You will hardly be able to perform in future what you wish yourself. For when you wish to be on this side of the sea, you will be sent to the other side. When you will wish to be an acre, you will be sent to the district of Antioch, to Tripolis, or to Armenia. Or you will be sent to Apulia, to Sicily, or to Lombardy, or to Burgundy, France, England, or any other country where we have houses and possessions. When you will wish to sleep, you will be ordered to watch. When you will wish to watch, then you will be ordered to go to bed. When you will wish to eat, then you will be ordered to do something else. And as both we and you might suffer great inconvenience from what you have mayhap concealed from us, look here on the holy evangelists and the word of God, and answer the truth to the questions which we shall put to you, for if you lie, you will be perjured and may be expelled the order from which God keep you. The questions which had been before asked him by his examiners were then repeated more at large, with the additional one whether he had made any contract with a Templar or another person to secure his admission. His answers being satisfactory, the master proceeded, "Beloved brother, take good heed that you have spoken truth to us, for should you in any one point have spoken falsely, you would be put out of the order from which God preserve you. Now, beloved brother, heed well what we shall say to you. Do you promise God and Mary, our dear Lady, that your life long you will be obedient to the master of the temple and the prior who is set over you?" "Yes, sir, God willing." "Do you promise God and Mary, our dear Lady, all your life long to live chaste in your body?" "Yes, sir, God willing." "Do you promise God and Mary, our dear Lady, your life long to observe the laudable manners and customs of our order, those which now are and those which the master and knights may hereafter ordain?" "Yes, sir, God willing." "Do you promise God and Mary, our dear Lady, that your life long you will, with the power and strength that God gives you, help to conquer the Holy Land of Jerusalem, and with your best power you will help to keep and guard that which the Christians possess?" "Yes, sir, God willing." "Do you promise God and Mary, our dear Lady, never to hold this order for stronger or weaker, for worse or for better, but with the permission of the master or the convent which has the authority?" "Yes, sir, God willing." "Finally, do you promise God and Mary, our dear Lady, that you will never be present when a Christian shall be unjustly and unlawfully despoiled of his heritage, and that you will never by counsel or act take part therein?" "Yes, sir, God willing." Then the master said, "Thus, in the name of God and Mary, our dear Lady, and in the name of St. Peter of Rome, and our Father the Pope, and in the name of all the brethren of the temple, we receive you to all the good works of the order, which have been done from the beginning and shall be done to the end, you, your father, your mother, and all your lineage, who you are willing shall have a share therein. In like manner do you receive us into all the good works which you have done or shall do. We assure you bread and water and the poor clothing of the order and toil and labor in abundance." The chaplain then read the 133rd Psalm and the prayer of the Holy Ghost, Deus qui cords fidelium, and the brethren repeated the Lord's Prayer. The prior and the chaplain gave the recipient the fraternal kiss. He was then seated before the master, who delivered to him a discourse on his duties and obligations as a member of the order. These duties may be thus summed up. He was never to assault a Christian, nor swear, nor receive any attendance from a woman without the permission of his superiors, not to kiss a woman, even his mother or sister, to hold no child to the baptismal font, and to abuse no man, but to be courteous to all. He was to sleep in a linen shirt, drawers and hose, and girded with a small girdle, to attend divine service punctually, and to begin and end his meals with a prayer. Such is the formula of reception which has been collected by Munter from the most authentic sources. It is evident, however, that it is not complete. The secret parts of the ritual are omitted, so that the formula is here something like what a Freemason would call the monitorial part of the instruction. Munter does not even give the form of the oath taken by the candidate, although Renouard says that it is preserved in the archives of the Abbey of Alcobaza in Aragon and gives it in the following words, on the authority of Henriguez in his regular, etc. Ordinis Cisterniensis. I swear to consecrate my discourse, my arms, my faculties, and my life to the defense of the sacred mysteries of the faith and to that of the unity of God. I also promise to be submissive and obedient to the Grand Master of the Order. At all times that it may be necessary, I will cross the seas to go to battle. I will contribute succor against infidel kings and princes. I will not turn my back on three foes. And even if I be alone, I will fight them if they are infidels. The fact that the Templars had a secret initiation is now generally conceded, although a few writers have denied it. But the circumstantial evidence in its favor is too great to be overcome by anything except positive proof to the contrary, which has never been adduced. It is known that at these receptions, none but members of the order were admitted, a prohibition which would have been unnecessary if the ceremonies had not been secret. In the meetings of the general chapter of the order, even the Pope's legate was refused admission. It would not be fair to quote the 120 accusations preferred against the Templars by Clement, because they were undoubtedly malicious falsehoods invented by an unprincipled pontiff pandering to the cupidity of an avaricious monarch. But yet some of them are of such a nature as to indicate what was the general belief of men at the time. Thus, Article 32 says, Quod receptiones istius clandestina faciebant, i.e., that they were wont to have their receptions in secret. The 100th is in these words, Quod sic se includunt ad tenenda capitula ut omnes januas domus et ecclesiae in quibus tenent capitula fermenta Deo firmiter quod nullus sit nec esse possit accessus ad eos nec juxta ut possit quicunque videre vel audire de factis vel dictis eorum, i.e., that when they held their chapters, they shut all the doors of the house or church in which they met so closely that no one could approach near enough to see or hear what they were doing and saying. And the next article is more particular, for it states that, to secure themselves against eavesdroppers, they were accustomed to place a watch, as we should now say a tiler, upon the roof of the house, ex cubicum supertectum, who could give the necessary warning. Of course, it is impossible to obtain an accurate knowledge of all the details of this secret reception of the ancient Templars, since it must have been generally oral. But I've always been inclined to think, from allusions here and there scattered through the history of their customs, that many of its features have descended to us and are to be found in the ritual of initiation practiced by the Masonic Knights Templar. The dress of the Templars was prescribed for them by St. Bernard in the rule which he composed for the government of the order, and is thus described in chapter 20. To all the professed knights, both in winter and summer, we give, if they can be procured, white garments, that those who have cast behind them a dark life may know that they are to commend themselves to their Creator by a pure and white life. The white mantle was therefore the peculiar vestment of the Templars, as the black was of the Hospitallers. Subsequently, for at first they wore no cross, Pope Eugenius III gave them a red cross patée as a symbol of martyrdom, which they were directed to wear on the left breast, just over the heart. The general direction of St. Bernard as to clothing was afterward expanded, so that the dress of a Templar consisted of a long white tunic, nearly resembling that of a priest's in shape, with a red cross on the front and back. Under this was his linen shirt clasped by a girdle. Over all was the white mantle with the red cross patty. The head was covered by a cap or hood attached to the mantle. The arms were a sword, lance, mace, and shield. Although at first the order adopted as a seal the representation of two knights riding on one horse, as a mark of their poverty, subsequently each knight was provided with 3 horses, and an esquire selected usually from the class of serving brethren. To write the history of the Templar order for the 2 centuries of its existence would, says Addison, be to write the Latin history of Palestine and would occupy a volume. Its details would be accounts of glorious struggles with the infidel in defense of the Holy Land and of Christian pilgrimage, sometimes successful and often disastrous, of arid sands well moistened with the blood of Christian and Saracen warriors, of disreputable contests with its rival of St. John, of final forced departure from the places which its prowess had conquered, but which it had not strength to hold, and of a few years of luxurious, and it may be of licentious indolence, terminated by a cruel martyrdom and dissolution. The fall of Acre in 1292, under the vigorous assault of the Sultan Mansur, led at once to the evacuation of Palestine by the Christians. The Knights Hospitallers of St. John of Jerusalem, afterward called Knights of Rhodes and then of Malta, betook themselves to Rhodes, where the former, assuming a naval character, resumed the warfare in their galleys against the Mohammedans. The Templars, after a brief stay in the island of Cyprus, retired to their different preceptories in Europe. Porter has no panegyric for these recreant knights. After eulogizing the Hospitallers for the persevering energy with which, from their island home of Rhodes, they continued the war with the infidels, he says, "The Templar, on the other hand, after a brief sojourn in Cyprus, instead of rendering the smallest assistance to his chivalrous and knightly brethren in their new undertaking, hurried with unseemly haste to his numerous wealthy European preceptories, where the grossness of his licentiousness, the height of his luxury, and the arrogance of his pride soon rendered him an object of the most invincible hatred among those who possessed ample power to accomplish his overthrow. During these last years of their existence, little can be said in defense of the order, and although the barbarous cruelty with which their extinction was accomplished has raised a feeling of compassion in their behalf, which bids fair to efface the memory of their crimes, still it cannot be denied that they had of late years so far deviated from the original purposes of their institution as to render them highly unfit depositories of that wealth which had been bequeathed to them for purposes so widely different from those to which they had appropriated it. The act of cruelty and of injustice by which the Templar order was dissolved in the 14th century has bequeathed an inglorious memory on the names of the infamous king and no less infamous pope who accomplished it. In the beginning of the 14th century, the throne of France was filled by Philip the Fair, an ambitious, a vindictive, and an avaricious prince. In his celebrated controversy with Pope Boniface, the Templars had, as was usual with them, sided with the pontiff and opposed the king. This act excited his hatred. The order was enormously wealthy. This aroused his avarice. Their power interfered with his designs of political aggrandizement, and this alarmed his ambition. He therefore secretly concerted with Pope Clement V a plan for their destruction and the appropriation of their revenues. Clement, by his direction, wrote in June 1306 to de Molay, the Grand Master who was then at Cyprus, inviting him to come and consult with him on some matters of great importance to the order. De Molay obeyed the summons and arrived in the beginning of 1307 at Paris, with 60 knights and a large amount of treasure. He was immediately imprisoned, and on the 13th of October following, every knight in France was, in consequence of the secret orders of the king, arrested on the pretended charge of idolatry and other enormous crimes, of which Squin de Flexion, a renegade and expelled prior of the order, was said to have confessed that the knights were guilty in their secret chapters. What these charges were has not been left to conjecture. Pope Clement sent a list of the articles of accusation, amounting to 120 in number, to all the archbishops, bishops, and papal commissaries upon which to examine the knights who should be brought before them. This list is still in existence, and in it we find such charges as these. 1. That they required those who were received into the order to abjure Christ, the Blessed Virgin, and all the saints. 7. That they denied that Christ had suffered for man's redemption. 9. That they made their recipients spit upon the cross or the crucifix. 14. That they worshipped a cat in their assemblies. 16. That they did not believe in the Eucharistic sacrifice. 20. That they said that the Grand Master had the power of absolution. 26. That they practiced obscene ceremonies in their receptions. 32. That their receptions were secret a charge repeated in Articles 97, 98, 99, 100 and 101 in different forms. 42, that they had an idol, which was a head with one or with three faces and sometimes a human skull. 52, 53, that they exercised magic arts. On such preposterous charges as these, the knights were tried and, of course, as a foregone conclusion, condemned. On the 12th of May, 1310, 54 of the knights were publicly burnt, and on the 18th of March, 1313, de Molay, the Grand Master, and the three principal dignitaries of the order suffered the same fate. They died faithfully asserting their innocence of all the crimes imputed to them. The order was now, by the energy of the King of France, assisted by the spiritual authority of the Pope, suppressed throughout Europe. So much of its vast possessions as were not appropriated by the different sovereigns to their own use or to that of their favorites, was bestowed upon the Order of the Knights of Malta, whose acceptance of the donation did not tend to diminish the ill feeling which had always existed between the members of the two orders. As to the story of the continuation of the order, after the death of James de Molay by Johannes Larmenius, under the authority of a charter of transmission given to him by de Molay a few days before his death. That subject is more appropriately treated in the history of the Order of the Temple, which claims by virtue of this charter to be the regular successor of the ancient order. From the establishment of the order by Hugh de Payens until its dissolution during the mastership of de Molay, 22 Grandmasters presided over the order, of whom the following is an accurate list, compiled on the authority of Addison. The role of Grandmasters in the rite of strict observance and that in the Order of the Templar differ in several names, but these roles are destitute of authenticity. 1. Hugh de Payens, elected in 1118. 2. Robert of Burgundy, elected in 1136. 3. Everard de Barry, elected in 1146. 4. Bernard de Tremolay, elected in 1151. 5. Bertrand de Blanquefort, elected in 1154. 6. Philip of Naplouse, elected in 1167. 7. Odo de Saint-Amand, elected in 1170. 8. Arnold de Troyes, elected in 1180. 9. Gerard de Ridefort, elected in 1185. 10. Brother Walter, elected in 1189. 11. Robert de Sable, elected in 1191. 12. Gilbert Horal, elected in 1195. 13. Philip de Plessis, elected in 1201. 14. William de Chartres, elected in 1217. 15. Peter de Montaigu, elected in 1218. 16. Herman de Perigord, elected in 1236. 17. William de Sonnac, elected in 1245. 18. Reginald de Vichier, elected in 1252. 19. Thomas Bérard, elected in 1256. 20. William de Beaujeu, elected in 1273. 21. Theobald de Gaudini, elected in 1291. 22. James de Molay, elected in 1297. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.